What is up, everybody? It is Alex from Heavy New York calling from Zoom, and this time we are here with Andrew Lee of Rip to Shreds. Thank you so much for being here, man. It's great to have you here.
What's up, man? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, anytime, man. Anytime. Thank you for giving us some new music to come out this year. We got Jubian out. Was your intention for Jubian to be a continuation of what we heard off the previous album, pronounced Luan, or was this meant to almost be kind of like a new beginning for Rip to Shreds?
I don't really think of music in terms of eras like that, at least when it comes to my own music. You know, I feel like whatever I write, is just what I write. So when it came to making a new record, I'm not thinking of like, drawing a line in the sand and saying, okay, this is going to be totally separate and different to whatever came before. So to me, I guess you can call it a continuation. But I can point out things that are, very different from album to album, but it's not like a conscious decision. It's just what I'm feeling in the moment as I write a new song.
Well, I love that you mentioned that, what you're feeling in the moment. But do you find that, sometimes you're working on a song for days or weeks or maybe even years? Do you find that maybe like the longer you're working on something, the harder it is to kind of like maintain that moment that initially sparked it?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, for instance, I think I got started on a new Rip to Shreds song maybe 6 months ago. And then I had a pretty strong idea for what I wanted it to be. But, other things got in the way. I never got around to finishing it. And then when I started, reviewing the demo for it and going back to it, I'm like, man, I don't even remember what I was thinking of when I first started writing it. And now I've got like this section at the end. I'm like, I have no idea what I'm going to do here.
Yeah, I mean, it happens all the time. And like, does it ever start off with a preconceived vision or an idea, or do you kind of like to just roll the dice with the songwriting and kind of let things sort of write themselves in a way?
I usually have an idea of what I want a song to be. I generally am not able to envision the entire song all at once, but I have, a general idea. Okay, I want it to be, I want this to be an aggressive song. I want to put a whole bunch of solos in it. Maybe there's like a specific musical concept that I want to put in it, but I have to let myself be open to whatever happens as I'm writing. I don't want to be totally stuck on an idea and try to force it. If it's not really working. So like I think the first song I started writing for Jubian would have been Violent Compulsion, and it started off. I think the first riff I came up with was the second riff, the one that with the stabs on the drums, and then it goes into a blast beat. And originally in my head, I was thinking, okay, I'm gonna make this like a bolt thrower style, a realm of chaos kind of song, and switch between blast beats and slow groovy beats. And then when I started really getting into the song and trying to expand on the initial riffs that I came up with, it like totally got away from me. It turned into kind of like this autopsy, obliteration, reptilian kind of thing. And if I had stuck to my initial idea, okay, I got to make this a bolt thrower style song, then maybe it wouldn't have turned out so good.
Yeah. Well, do you feel, because that's one thing I would describe Rip to Shreds on. It has a relatively experimental style. I listened to the entirety of Jubian, and this album is incredible. But do you think that for people who haven't heard the full length album, do you think that the first three singles that you released maybe serve as a good representation of all of Jubian, or is that just scratching the surface so far?
I think the ones that we use as singles are the most self-contained songs. I always, I mean, of course, when I write a song, I want it to stand on its own. But maybe it's not necessarily a song that I would think, okay, I want you to hear this song, and it's gonna be the one that's gonna appeal to as many people as possible. Um, or like the second to last song, Paragonation. That one's like slow drop. We drop tuned to A on that song. Usually we play in B, and it's kind of slow and groovy. And that's not really a vibe on the rest of the album. So I didn't want to use that as a single and have people, expect that for the whole album. But I think the ones that we used are a pretty good taster of what the album is generally like.
Hmm. Do you want your music to be open to interpretation in a way, like, or is there like a specific subject matter that maybe like you want to inform the listener on, or maybe engage them in as much as the music itself?
I mean, so I think, when you look at most death metal bands, they write about horror, they write about war and death, and it's usually from a very Eurocentric or Western point of view. I mean, even you look at Japanese bands, they're kind of like imitating, Western subject matter. They sing about hell, they sing about zombies, and all this stuff that's that you see from like Texas Chainsaw Massacre or something, you know. And I felt like it was an opportunity to just do something a little bit different with Rip to Shreds. Um, because I mean, at least for Chinese culture, there's a huge amount of different kinds of folklore or monsters or death rituals that you can write all sorts of death metal songs about, but it's just not something that's really been explored in death metal. At least, not that I found.
Do you think it is possible? And I know this may sound like a really stupid idea, but do you think there could be a death metal band or song even that doesn't write about stuff that's so macabre and actually like write like something? I mean, sure, it's been done as sort of like satire in a way, but do you think that like a very romantic song or even like relatively emo lyrics even could also be like be transcribed into a death metal sort of thing?
I think it has to be some kind of negative emotion. So, um, you know, failed romantic love, or pain relating to love, or that works. That works for me. But I think for something as dark and aggressive as death metal, it has to be a negative kind of feeling. If it's something really positive, it just doesn't match with the music for me. So when you see like parody bands, I don't want to name names, but parody death metal bands
We all know
that
who
sing
they are.
about, yeah, silly stuff, that that doesn't really work for me. I mean, I'm sure their music is fine, but you know, at least when I look at a relatively more serious band, I want the themes and the music to all go together.
Does the theme guide your hand with regards to making the music itself? Do you think of a lyrical subject matter before the music could come into play, or do you prefer to have music already written before any lyrics or sort of visions come into play with the meaning?
It goes both ways. I'm trying to think because I know I wrote Split Apart. I came up with the concept and the theme behind that song before I started writing any music for it. And especially on the first album, Yellow River, I had the idea, I had the image of like a dam breaking, and I wanted to think, okay, what would be a cool way to represent that? And I'm thinking, okay, I'm gonna have this like big build up, and then everything's gonna stop, and then I'm gonna hit a huge dive bomb whammy, and then that's gonna be kind of like the dam breaking and the floodwaters coming out and killing a million people. So really, it can go both ways. It just depends on if I have something cool in mind, really.
In order to get that inspiration, that creative energy, do you almost kind of like have to put yourself in a specific place? I see you're sort of like in your studio now. Do you almost kind of like need to be in a certain place in order to cultivate ideas, or does inspiration usually strike when you least expect it?
No, I have to put myself in like a working frame of mind. If I'm like playing video games or watching movies or whatever, it's pretty rare for me to think of something that I could use for my music because it's just not where my head is at.
Hmm. Yeah, I think if you try to, forcing yourself to do any type of music is sometimes it works. Like people always are quick to say you can't force yourself to do it. Sometimes putting yourself in that sort of aggression or like sort of masochistic element, it does definitely work sometimes. But also, if you have like a mode that you could go into to cultivate ideas, if the machine isn't broken, don't fix it, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of authors, specifically like writers, often say that they have to sit down at their desk and write at least a page every day in order for them to actually be able to come up with something useful. Even if they throw out most of those pages, they have to have the ritual of sitting down to start doing work in order to get the engine running and to produce something worthwhile.
Definitely.
And I think, at least for me, it's the same way. I can't just, you know, be doing nothing and then suddenly come up with inspiration for songs, lyrics, melodies. I have to, sit down with my guitar, say, okay, today I'm going to work on a couple of riffs or work on a couple of melodies and just see what I come up with. And then most of the time, you know, nothing worthwhile. Sometimes I come up with something good and I'm like, okay, let's expand on that. Let's work on it.
Well, is like do you ever go researching for it in a way? Like, does like maybe taking a walk or maybe exploring other mediums of art, such as film or literature, could also maybe be like a subject matter or help maybe sort of cultivate a vision?
Oh yeah, yeah. No, that definitely does come into play. Yeah. If I'm, out on a walk and I'm listening to music, or if I'm like flipping through like a history book or reading history articles or something, that can also spark an idea. But I think in those modes, I kind of think of it like a research mode. So it's still in the back of my head that I'm trying to look for some kind of inspiration,
Hmm.
making myself open to inspiration. You could put it that way.
This is a new question I've been liking to ask different bands. Is it easier or better for I should say? Do you think it's better if everybody in the band is sort of like in the same headspace when it comes to writing a song or an album and is more or less kind of like on the same page? Or do you think that if everybody is sort of like in their own little world in a way, because everybody is their own person, that that can maybe help bring contrast or different perspectives or different meanings into the music?
I mean, so the way that Ripta Shreds write music, so from day one, it's always at the very start, it was a one-man band. I'm the only one writing the music. And for the new album, I'm still writing the uh the basic arrangements and everything. And then once I have a song that's relatively complete, then I show it to the rest of the dudes, and then they can, give me their feedback on it and come up with their drum parts or bass parts, and they might have like some suggestions on arrangements. And in that sense, I think it's very helpful for them to have a different kind of perspective. And then when I look at some of my other bands, say Azath, for instance, uh, Brandon is my bandmate, one of my best friends. We run Nameless Grave together. Um, Brandon and I have to be in a very similar headspace for us to be productive when we're trying to come up with music for a song together.
Okay, it happens, and you led me perfectly into the next question actually, because you know you are a very prolific artist. I mean, just to name a couple of bands, you mentioned Azeth as you talked about, but there was Serpent Rider, and you played live with Spinebreaker, and you've played with a lot of different styles of bands and different bands and collaborated with different musicians. Does the mindset of every project sort of change with everything you do, or could there be sort of like a method behind the madness that sort of applies to everything?
I think the mindset of needing to sit down and focus on writing music is going to be the same for whatever style I'm attempting. But I try to keep all the bands that I participate in their own styles. I I don't want to be a Raga Johansson, where he has 50 bands, but you couldn't tell which band is which. Um, so I'm definitely conscious of keeping, like Azath and Ripper Shreds. They're both death metal, but they're very different kinds of death metal. The way I approach riffs and melodies and arrangement is totally different for the two bands. So I think musically, I try to keep stuff as separate as I can.
Does it almost portray a different side of you personally as well?
I wouldn't really say that. They're all just aspects of what I like and enjoy in metal.
But with exploring the sort of like macabre nature in death metal and all that, is there ever a time where maybe your personal life or your personal experience or trials and tribulations is also maybe a subject matter that could be addressed in your music as well?
Yeah. So at least for Rip the Shreds, on the first album there was a song called Bone Ritual, and that one was inspired when my grandfather died, and then we flew back to Taiwan, and then we had a Buddhist funeral for him, and all the rituals behind that, because it's so different from I guess typically in America, we have Christian funerals, right? We go to church, the priest says some sort of prayer, all that stuff, and it's very different. So that comes through there. And on the new record, also there was Harmonious Impiety, where we have a very at least Chinese culture has the concept of filial piety, where we have to respect our parents, um, and you know, in a way that's not really common in Western culture. And you can say that some of my frustration comes through when writing those kinds of lyrics.
Yeah, absolutely. And you couldn't be more right, especially with the respect of parents in Western culture. I've seen kids talk to their parents in ways where if I spoke to my mom that way, believe me, there would be plenty of subject matter used for plenty of death metal albums after that. But and it and when it comes to like experiencing Buddhism and all these different cultures, I've always loved it when bands do bring like one of my favorite bands in black metal is Cult of Fire, and they bring a lot of aspects of Hinduism and Buddhism and a lot of different polytheistic and monotheistic religions. Have you ever thought about maybe bringing in some more cultural influences as well? Maybe kind of like, I really don't like this term, but it is the easiest thing to say. Bring like sort of like a hybrid into your death metal style in a way.
Oh, you mean like folk instrumentation?
Folk instrumentation or certain prayers or certain traditional music in general.
Um, in terms of writing music, I would say absolutely not. Rip to Shreds is a death metal band, and I plan on keeping it as the death metal band. If you're talking about like samples or intros, you know, um, so I have always wanted, because when I was a kid, and um, my grandparents' home in Taiwan overlooked like this major street, and every so often you would hear this kind of funeral music, and you would see, there's a procession coming down the street with the deceased laid on the back of a truck, and that funeral music to me was really disturbing, and I don't really have the words to describe it properly. It's like this strange kind of noisy horn music that's supposed to like ward off evil spirits. And I feel like, that would be something I'd be interested in putting in as like a sample intro to Ripter Shreds. But actually, I haven't been able to find, a good sample for it.
Hmm. Well, I know that in Hinduism, for example, like I remember reading a story that after a bombing occurred in Indonesia, they needed to keep the blast site like and the debris on the in the city still there so they could do an investigation and where these people came from, like do forensics. But in Hinduism, they believed the ghosts of the dead haunted that site and it needed to be pushed into the river. So it's just always fascinating to me on how, what happens when we die is still and always will be the greatest mystery of humanity, and no scientific or technological development can ever answer that. but everybody has all their different interpretations of it. And even in death metal, the word death is in its genre, but there's melodic death metal, traditional death metal, technical death metal. Could you really just see yourself exploring other types of death metal as well? Because I do think Rip to Shreds kind of has many different elements of death metal, just like there's many different cultures analyzing dead in itself.
Mm, I guess we have elements that you could point to as like like Race Trader is a very melodic song. It's intentionally written to be evocative of other melodeath bands like Eucharist or Intestine Balism or the Horrendous or even God, there's that Swedish death thrash band Merciless, and maybe we have riffs that you could call technical, or we have a ton of solos, but you know I generally just call Rip to Shreds death metal. I guess because I don't consciously pull from the other major subgenres. So to me, I think I'm fine with just calling it death metal.
And the final question I wanted to ask you, actually, I have two more questions for you. Going back into songwriting, how do you know when you're finished with a song?
I guess I don't really have a good answer for that.
Nobody does.
When I listen to it and it sounds done, then it's done.
You know what? At least you're honest about it. Everybody tries. And thank you for not giving me the abandoned answer. I appreciate that. um, and finally, I wanted to ask you, and kind of like keep it, end it on like a easy note. But like, I love talking death metal with death metal bands. I know it is kind of cliche to ask like, what are your inspirations? But like, what got you into death metal? Because nobody, if anybody's telling me that they were going to kindergarten class with their lunchbox listening to Tomb of the Mutilated by Cannibal Corpse, they're lying to you. So like, what was
Right,
your
right.
sort of gateway into discovering death metal, and who have been some of your like favorite death metal bands, and is there any underground band that you'd like to plug or shout out?
I mean, like, the very first metal band I got into was In Flames, and this would have been 2005 or six.
What
So
album?
this was when they were in their terrible new metal mullcore phase.
Hey, A Sense of Purpose is my favorite In Flames album, so be nice.
I think the one I got into was Soundtrack to Your Escape. So that was two albums before Sense of Purpose.
Okay.
I mean, I can listen to it now and still really enjoy it, even though I know it's objectively not a good album.
Fair enough.
But like before that, I was super into hip hop. I listened to like all the pop stuff on the radio. But when I heard that first In Flames that In Flames album, I was like, this is something totally different, something I've never heard before, and that served as a gateway into the world of metal. And then I think from there I got into bands like, I mean, of course, Death, Meshuggah, Children of Bodom. Um, I guess you would say, I guess like Dismember and Vital Remains were also really big then, and those served as a gateway into kind of the bigger world of death metal.
Definitely. And is there any underground metal bands, or what have been some of your favorite death metal bands that come out in the last couple of years? Because I think death metal right now has had one of the best resurgences with the rise of Blood Incantation and Gate Creeper and just so many other bands that you can't even name.
Right, right. Of course, there's Undeath. Undeath is great.
Amazing.
Um, see, I think there was a band from Philly called Trench Rot, but they're broken up now. Their drummer moved out of Philly to Michigan, and then I loved that. Like everyone else in the band is playing like in Crypt Sermon and Deva now, and then the Deva album is really cool.
Crypt
But
Sermon's
like
awesome
that
too.
that that Trench Rot album, man, that to me is probably, I mean, it's definitely in my top three death metal albums of the last 15 years or so. The other two are Horrendous's Ecdysis and Dead Congregation's Promulgation of the Fall.
Okay.
And then, so, I mean, like, Horrendous, Undeath, Crypt Sermon, Reptilian, um, Morbus Kron. I mean, Morbus Kron has been dead for a while, but
Frozen
yeah,
Soul. You listen to
those.
them?
Mm, I mean, they're all right. I wouldn't call them like one of my favorite bands.
Okay. Creeping Death too is another great one. So if you haven't,
Oh, and I guess Acephalix has been around for a pretty long time, but you know, the new Acephalix album is super sick. Um, oh, of course, there's also Insepulture from Fresno, but I know Adam because Adam also plays in Acephalix, and but Adam like moved really far away recently, so I don't know if we'll ever see the Insepulture album. They put out like two super sick demos, and they were supposed to put out an album. I was super hyped for it, but still hasn't shown up. And now with Adam moving away, I don't know if it'll ever show up.
you never know. You got to be on him about that. So before we go, I want to thank you so much for your time for such a awesome conversation. Is there just
For
anything
sure,
else
man.
that you would like to promote for Rip to Shreds in terms of shows or new music with the release of Jubia?
Yeah, we got a show on the 22nd in Santa Cruz with Ghoul, um, and Doomsday. Two of the other, uh, Mike and Ryan, they're also in the band Doomsday, and so they're opening for us at that Ghoul show, and they have a new EP coming out November 18th. So they're a super sick crossover thrash band. So everyone should also check them out.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Everybody, we are here with Andrew Lee of Rip to Shreds. Be sure to check out their brand new album, Jubian, coming out tomorrow. If you're watching this today, it's officially out now. Be sure to check it out while supplies last forever. And we will see you next time on Heavy New York.